Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the program. Before we start the webinar officially, Mark, can I please ask you to bring up the translation slide? Just for our colleagues on the call that speak Russian, just letting you know that there is Russian interpretation available, which you can now select at the bottom of your screen. If you can follow the instructions available on that slide, you'll be able to hear the presentations and myself talk in Russian. So if we move to the next slide, once again, a very big welcome to everyone to the Road Safety Capacity Building Program, Webinar Series 2, which has been brought to you by the Asia Pacific Road Safety Observatory, the APRSO, and the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, CAREC, and the Asian Development Bank. So the grant funding supporting this webinar series was received by the Japan Fund for Prosperous and Resilient Asia and the Pacific, financed by the government of Japan through the Asian Development Bank. So a very warm welcome to everyone once again. For those that have not met me yet, my name is Jessica Trung and I'm from Lösninger, an organization that specializes in Vision Zero planning. So we're very excited to have you join us for this second webinar series, which is focusing on safe and sustainable transport. So we're currently in session 3 of the overall series program, and we're very pleased that today this session is actually a joint session with the ADB Green Roads webinar series. And today we'll be focusing on how do we actually integrate road safety into the climate and sustainability agenda and be able to help each other meet our mutual goals. So we can move to the next slide, please. You can see that we've got a great lineup of speakers today joining us for this session. We have Blair Turner from the World Bank, Prasanthi Atwood from the George Institute for Global Health, and we have Frank van Steenbergen from Meta, who is a consultant working for the Green Road series. So we're very pleased that you'll be able to hear from each of these speakers in turn and hear a little bit more about urban climate sustainability and the integration with road safety. So we can move to the next slide, please. As you can see, we're more than halfway through our webinar series 2 already. So we have today's session focusing on climate and sustainability changes, and then we do have 2 other sessions coming up in the next month, focusing on urban resilience and also the co-benefits of speed. So we encourage you to join us for these remaining sessions as well, as much as possible, because they're bound to be great sessions. So if we can move to the next slide. So as you can see on this slide here, just a very few quick housekeeping matters. You'll notice that your mic is muted unless we invite you to speak. And at the bottom of your screen, there is a question and answer function that we encourage all participants to use to interact with each other, to ask questions of our panelists. And feel free, if you do actually have any questions at the, that you feel like you can answer, please feel free to type your answer into the box as well. And just a reminder that all the materials from this session will be available online for you to be able to download after the session. And of course, we will try and have a bit of time at the remaining 15 minutes of the session to allow you to be able to ask questions of our speakers as well. So please feel free to pop your questions into that Q&A box. So housekeeping out of the way, we can now begin our webinar series properly, and I am very pleased to be able to welcome Frank van Steenbergen from Meta, who will open this session for us and give us a bit of an overview about the toolkit that is available from Green Roads. So a very warm welcome, Frank, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jessica, and everybody who is involved in organizing this. I think it's really great to make the connection between green roads and road safety. And let me introduce in this session Green Roads Toolkit and take a small sample out of it. to just show how relevant this connection is and how much the agendas are joint agendas. Maybe to the next one, Mark. So first of all, what are green roads and why are they needed? Why do we talk about them a lot? Basically, green roads come from the sort of understanding and awareness that roads are really important for connectivity but also for a lot of other things. They have a lot of impact. They have an impact on land and water management, on pollution, on carbon emissions, on ecosystems. So basically, green roads try to sort of bring in all those other agendas and create the bigger impact. I think there's a lot of work ahead. There's also a lot of work ahead with road safety. Yeah? There's also a big challenge there. And I think there's really a need to move from regular roads, the roads that we've been building for a long time, to roads that are both green and safe. Maybe to the next slide. In the Green Roads Toolkit, we at the moment have 9 sort of themes, yeah, that are sort of developed. And you can just see quickly that in all these themes, there's an important connection with road safety. For instance, decarbonization, that's very much also introducing EV technologies, which is often a good opportunity to upgrade road safety standards. In climate resilience and road safety, they're mutually enforcing because you don't want disruptions in the road. With water management, there's a joint agenda around aqua planning, with pollution control, and I will go a little bit into that. There's a lot to be done around, for instance, roadside vegetation, to enhance visibility and other factors. Quality of life, I think road safety is a major factor in quality of life. Yeah, if you see the amount of casualties and the hardship it causes, but also from the sort of green roads perspective, you can contribute a lot to driver alertness, biodiversity, avoid animal collisions, disaster risk reduction. Assure road safety during calamities, very important, more than normal. Safe sourcing, to think of anti-skidding material, and inclusive growth. And there's a big agenda as well, because the economic losses due to casualties in the most active group from traffic injuries and traffic accidents is so high. So the growth agenda and the road safety agenda is really very much aligned. Maybe to the next one. So the synergies are strong. So what is the Green Roads Toolkit? The Green Roads Toolkit was launched about a year ago and is constantly updated. It's basically a collection of best practices organized around these 9 themes I just mentioned. And these are practices that can be applied in different stages of road development, in road management, in road planning, in design, in asset management. The toolkit is made in such a way, and here, of course, is the QR code to have access to it, that you can easily search the sort of things which are of interest for your geography, for your stage of project. Is it an urban road? Is it the highway? Is it the rural road, etc. And then it comes with a number of additional checklists, for instance, to analyze the enabling frameworks around green roads as well. So it's really meant to support road agencies, but also investors in road developments to promote sustainability. Maybe to the next one. So this is just an overview. You ask a question, you sort of say, in this geography, a mountain geography, for instance, and this type of road, in this stage of development, in this sort of degree of impact, you get a long list basically of useful practices. And all these practices are described in more detail in 2 or 3 pages. So it puts you basically on the right track and opens the perspective for new practices. Maybe to the next slide. I would like to zoom in just to emphasize the importance into roadside vegetation, which is also very much mentioned in the toolkit. on different themes. Because I think that is one where, things come together. It's very easy to see how things come together. So both in rural and urban areas, roadside vegetation and traffic safety are very closely related. And there's basically four maybe commonalities in the separation of traffic lanes, in visibility, in driver alertness, and also in avoiding collision risk, particularly, avoiding collisions with, roadside fixed objects. Maybe to the next slide. On separation of traffic lanes, and I think we will have a presentation also on the dangers of, pedestrians being exposed to car accidents. Green strips really can reduce the risk of vehicles entering such pedestrian zones. They can help to lower vehicle speeds and so to use the greenery to separate and enhance the safety, particularly of the weaker traffic users, I think is a very important one. And it creates more safe and comfortable environments for everyone on the road. Maybe to the next one. Visibility and reduced glare. I think also here there's an important joint agenda. Roadside vegetation can really help the visibility of the road. It can guide the sort of, awareness of the direction of the roads, particularly in bends. Yeah. But of course, you have to be very careful. It can also work the other way. It can block sightlines. So, that you should avoid. So don't have the vegetation in the inner bends, for instance, and plan this properly. Is also an important one in reducing glare and squinting. That's probably less important in urban areas, but in rural areas, the belts of trees, they can provide dimming lights. They can dim the lights in the direction of the low suns, but also they can also block, and this is also quite common on highways and more. They can prevent the reduce of headlights from the other side of the road. And roads in general, vegetation in general, can be also used to signal, that you enter a different area, more a residential area. And so the landscaping in a subtle way can be used to signal that we're now in a different area as a road user. The third one, maybe, can you go to the next one, Mark? Is driver alertness. I think that's a very fascinating topic. First, the roadside vegetation can really be used to break visual monotony, particularly on long drives, on highways. A lot of accidents happen, of course, also because of driver fatigue. And with roadside vegetation, particularly if you vary it, you can break that monotony. And then the other one is really an interesting one. It's from psychology. It's called attention restoration theory. Basically, people have discovered that when we are exposed to natural elements like trees and greenery and shrubs, we have lower stress levels, but also we have improved cognitive functions. We are more alert, basically, and so and I think when you think of it, you say, yeah, of course, yeah. It sort of recharges you it keeps you at a high attention level. The third one is also important. It's a new area, maybe linked between roads and environmental psychology. The perception of public space, if the roads is neglected. When we spend most of our time on the streets and roads, we also have a feeling of neglect. So a sort of well-planned road with proper greenery, etc., and not too much dirt along the road really helps you to be more alert. Maybe to the next one. This is just an example. Actually, for instance, if you plant trees along roads and you don't put them at a regular distance, but at an irregular distance, you will sort of the driver will unconsciously be more alert because he cannot sort of judge his speed automatically by the distance from the trees, because the trees are not distance at the same with the same space. And this really helps to reduce traffic accidents. There's been work in Germany where the traffic accidents really reduced with 60% by having such, sections along the roads where basically the visibility is sort of manipulated with the trees. The last one, very important, maybe to the next one, Mark, is to avoid collision, of course. I mean, trees can also be a killer, yeah, particularly on roads with high speed. And so we need guidelines. And on high-speed roads, we don't want the roads to be anywhere near where they can cause a fatal accident. So there needs to be a distance or a barrier or no trees, yeah. But on slower speed roads, and I think particularly in urban areas, we have a lot of opportunities to use roads to guide traffic behavior. Now back to the toolkit, to the next slide, Mark. Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I don't want to miss this. We also have a lot of tools that we can use. We have the Green View Index for cities, really helpful to see where's the greenery in the city, where's the greenery along the road, so you can identify, the areas of greening. It's basically with Street View, you select the areas where which are green and which are not green, and you really look from the perspective of the pedestrian or the driver, and this really is helpful to do a quick scan of where is the biggest opportunity to introduce such practices. Maybe to the next slide, yeah. So yeah, if we reflect on the Green Roads Toolkit, the toolkit is there. It has now 9 major categories, and we want definitely to add road safety as a separate category because it's so important. So if you look at the picture on the left side, this is where we are with the Green Roads Toolkit. I think we've had a very strong basis. And this is actually on the right side, this is where, we see the results. On the left side, basically, it's like a big bunker to, plant trees and have a lot of space and it's covered. And then, the same thing after a while, you have a very strong basis to have roads and bicycle lanes. So yeah, we're really excited to have this webinar and also to make stronger language in these two big agendas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Frank, for that really interesting presentation. I think I was fascinated by some of the information that you presented. What you were talking about, how, tall trees can help reduce glare, and being exposed to natural elements can actually make drivers more alert. It's all really interesting information, and it'll be great to be able to delve into, a lot more detail around the implications for road safety. So while trees are fantastic, we know that it's also a very big risk for drivers if they were to lose control and run off the road. So how do we actually make sure that the road safety and the climate agendas are actually matched so that we don't actually cause more, risk for our drivers on the roads? So maybe we'll be able to have a chance to delve into that in a little bit more detail in the Q&A session. Thank you so much for that, Frank. Mark, can we please bring up the first poll question? So you heard a little bit about how and why we should actually integrate road safety into the climate and sustainability agenda. I'll be interested to hear from the audience. Well, are we actually integrating road safety into the climate and sustainability agenda in your particular jurisdiction? So if you can fill in that poll question on your screen now, we'll come back with the answer from this question a little bit later in the webinar. So with that, I'll like to move to our next speaker, Prashanthi Atwood from the George Institute for Global Health. Welcome, Prash, and Prash will be giving us a bit of a case study on safe roads and air for safer school journeys. So the floor is yours, Prash.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Prashanthi Atwood. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the George Institute for Global Health, Imperial College London. And I've really been working at this kind of intersection of injury prevention, urban health, and also community-led research in low and middle income countries for a number of years now. Today, I'm going to be sharing insights from the REM Walks project, which explores that overlapping risks of road traffic injuries and air pollution exposure during children's school journeys in Blantyre, Malawi. So, as Frank has mentioned, we know that these two issues, road safety and air quality, have often been treated separately in research and in policy. But as I hope this project kind of shows, they are deeply interconnected in both their causes and their impacts, especially for children in these kind of rapidly urbanizing contexts. And whilst we found that there has obviously been steady progress in road safety globally, particularly through transport sector investments, air quality has received far less attention, particularly in the policy world, despite growing evidence on the health burden. But because both of these problems stem from some of the same underlying causes, as we've heard, unregulated traffic, poor infrastructure, land use decisions, there is scope for joint solutions. So this project was developed in response to an urgent need to improve child safety and health, particularly in the face of rapid, unregulated urbanization in low resource settings. And we chose to work in Blantyre, Malawi for several reasons. Malawi has one of the highest child road traffic injury burdens in sub-Saharan Africa, and the children there face disproportionately high exposure to traffic-related air pollution on their daily commutes. And these are not abstract risks, right? They manifest in daily life, in unsafe crossings, in dust-filled roads, waste-burning sites along the school routes. And so REM Walks was designed to try and better understand this nexus, but also to do so in a way that centered the voices of those who were most affected, the children, the parents and caregivers, and the local community. So our overarching aim was to improve the health and safety of the children's school journeys by tackling both road traffic injuries and air pollution exposure. So we conducted a mixed methods design, which was embedded in community-based participatory research to look at the objectives that you see there. And I think what really set this study apart and was beneficial for us as a research team was the integration of both those subjective and those objective data. So alongside knowledge, attitude practice and mobility surveys and quantitative star ratings, children and families kept sort of detailed photo diaries of their school journeys. They also carried air quality monitors and GPS trackers, which was part of a separate study that one of our co-investigators was heading, studying asthma amongst school children in 7 countries, one of which was Malawi. So this merging of quantitative and qualitative data allowed us to build a really vivid ground level picture of the risk, one that statistics alone would not be able to provide. So I'll talk you through some of the data. This large-scale survey that we did involved over 2,400 students from 6 schools in the area. And we found nearly all children walked to school, and the risks were striking. Right? 30% had experienced a near miss, and 5% had actually been in a crash. And yet, knowledge didn't always translate to safe practice. So whilst 85% perceived themselves to be at risk, only 15% reported that they consistently followed road safety principles. Looking at the air quality side, 88% of children recognised that smoggy air was bad for their health, indicating that they did have a strong baseline awareness. However, the infrastructure and policy supports to protect them were found to be lacking. So these findings helped us to triangulate where children felt unsafe and where interventions might actually gain traction. So we complemented these surveys with structured observation tools like IRAP star rating for schools and direct speed observations. And these revealed widespread non-compliance with speed limits, poor pedestrian infrastructure, and inconsistent school zone protections. So we found that such tools not only strengthened our quantitative evidence base, but we were able to use them to provide a really clear visual framework to engage the local partners and the policymakers in our dialogues about feasible improvements later on in the study. As mentioned, we were fortunate enough to be able to access data through one of our colleagues at Imperial and King's College London that spoke to the actual PM 2.5 levels that school-going children were exposed to. And that data, that air pollution exposure data, was actually gathered using PM 2.5 monitors that were sort of mounted on the children's backpacks. And what we found was that in Blantyre particularly, average exposure during school commutes was over 3 times the WHO limit, with spikes reaching up to 20 times that in particular hotspots that they were exposed to during their school commute, such as construction zones or waste burning sites. And these objective data, gathered alongside subjective diaries and GPS, made that burden of air pollution really visible in a way that is very often lacking, particularly in low and middle income countries. So the CAPA student diaries revealed 3 consistent themes surrounding air pollution exposure. Firstly, roadside marketplaces and open waste burning, which was reflected as well in the hotspots of the actual PM 2.5 data. But it also highlighted the emotional burden that children felt navigating these environments, pointing to some of that kind of psychosocial toll of pollution that numbers and statistics can't fully capture on their own. We then complemented this with our own focus group discussions, and these gave us a really broad picture of how communities perceive that risk that their children face on their school journeys. So there were concerns about vehicle speed, about dust, congestion, poor walking infrastructure, and these were voiced repeatedly across a lot of the groups. But what was also significant was that the participants didn't just list the problems, they were invested. They proposed grounded solutions. And these included things such as calming traffic around the schools, shifting those market stalls away from the roadside, increasing enforcement about emission rules, improving the footpaths, etc. So their suggestions not only showed a really intuitive understanding of that kind of nexus between traffic risks and air quality, but it also pointed to a desire for a more systemic change, one where policies and infrastructure that could protect children and reduce air pollution would work synergistically and simultaneously. This slide showcases our photo voice component of the study, which really empowered the students that we were working with in these schools to document the hazards that they faced on a daily school commute. So using cameras, the students were able to capture and caption some of the images of air pollution and road safety risks. And then they came together to discuss it as a group, as a moderated group with our research team. And these narratives lent a really critical insight into the lived experience of the children. And I haven't sadly got time to be able to show you all of the photos, but a lot of the photos that you've seen today in this presentation have been from their sort of capturing. So with all of that in hand, all of the sort of quantitative and the qualitative work, we then moved on to implementing what we called a modified Delphi process to co-prioritize some of these integrated interventions. So this involved 12 local stakeholders and 15 international experts, including policymakers, researchers, practitioners. But we also integrated the community input and feedback and had a very bidirectional sort of scheme going on where what the stakeholders and experts were saying was fed to the community and back again. And this process yielded consensus on 3 high priority intervention areas: traffic calming, pedestrian infrastructure, and emission controls. And specifically, stakeholders emphasized things such as speed bumps, clear speed limits with enforcement, and restricting high emission vehicles near school zones. So these choices reflected both feasibility and relevance in the Malawian context. But importantly, this process where we were doing this kind of simultaneous conversation with the community, it ensured that local expertise was actually centered, whilst also aligning with our global evidence. And the outcome is a roadmap of integrated, actionable strategies that addressed both road safety and air pollution in a synergistic way. So in closing, I just want to show this study reminds us that evidence is not just about measurement, it's about momentum. In contexts where both air quality and road safety are often under prioritized, being able to generate credible, community-rooted evidence can bring huge visibility to burdens that would otherwise remain invisible. We heard from children about the fear, the smoke, the speeding vehicles. We saw how even on routine journeys, they are shaped by risk. And that kind of grounded insight is vital for being able to design interventions that are not just technically sound, but that they're also accepted, equitable, implementable, and sustainable. Evidence like this, the study enabled a huge amount of coalition building across sectors, across ministries, and across funding streams. And so when you show how the same interventions can reduce crashes, can cut pollution, and promote child health, you create a space for integrated solutions and shared accountability. And it strengthens that case for smarter, more coordinated investment. And finally, this research has led to an actionable package that we hope to take forward, grounded in what children experience, in what communities propose, and in what experts endorse. And it is a model that can be adapted and scaled. Although this study was rooted in the urban context of Blantyre, Malawi, the challenges that we explored, unsafe school routes, traffic-related air pollution, fragmented planning responses, these are shared across many rapidly growing cities, including those in the Asia-Pacific region. But what this research highlights is not just a local case study, but it's a transferable approach, one that can combine community engagement, rigorous methods, and integrated solutions to address the everyday risks that children face. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and interest. I'm happy to field any questions either now on this webinar or later via email. Please do get in touch.
Thank you so much, Prash, for that case study. I found it fascinating, and I absolutely agree with you that there are solutions available that can address multiple areas of public health. And the example that you gave us just now is a perfect one of showing how common solutions can address both climate, child safety, and road safety issues. And I think we need more integration between these areas so that we are using our limited resources in a lot of cases as effectively as possible. So thank you so much for sharing that case study with us. And we'll hope to be able to have time to delve into it a little bit more in the Q&A session. But thank you so much, Prash. I'd like to introduce our next speaker now, Mr. Blair Turner from the World Bank, and who will be sharing with us how to build safe and sustainable roads, including some case studies. Welcome, Blair, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Jess, and hi to the audience. Thanks for joining this really interesting and important conversation. So I want to just continue the theme around some of these linkage points between these different areas. But first, just to say that certainly the World Bank's very aware of the significance of the issues around the need for sustainable transport and road safety. Large investments have been made in projects and a lot of activity. And just as one example, there's a couple of trust funds, which there's the Global Facility to Decarbonise Transport and the Global Road Safety Facility, where I used to work, where essentially we leverage activity in these areas through larger projects, and we're able to, I guess, implement some quite large-scale projects to try and tackle both of these critical issues. Jess, I'm going to be fascinated to see the results from your poll, because I believe that we don't really push hard enough in this area about integrating sustainable transport and safety together. What I do want to do is just highlight some of the touch points, though, and I'll use this framework around for those that have been involved in this area, you're probably familiar with this avoid, shift, improve type paradigm. So avoiding travel, shifting modes, and improving what we're doing. And then I guess longer term, there was this issue about strengthening our systems to enhance resilience. And all of these really have touch points with safety outcomes, which I'll just show a couple of examples only here. There's many more activities going on, both from the World Bank and ADB and many others across the globe, though, which I think we're starting to see some really interesting outcomes from. So in terms of this shift element, we're trying to shift modes, shift rate to greener modes. A really good example of this is the movement to public transport through bus, rapid transit and metro systems. Obviously, there's impacts there around emissions reductions, but they are also our safest modes of transport as well. So it's almost halving the number of those who are seriously injured when we move on to public transport from other modes, and particularly from motorcycling. Another big area is the provision of facilities for safe walking and safe cycling. And the image, the bottom left report there is a new document from the World Bank, which goes into the detail about how to embed cycling and other active mobility into larger projects. Speed management, I'm going to come back onto that speed topic because I think that's really a critical touch point between these topics. Motorization management, there's a document bottom right here, which is really about ways we can ensure that we import vehicles into countries. So for instance, in Africa, many of the vehicles might be second-hand and often less safe and polluting. So trying to put in place systems to actually limit emissions, but also to select safer vehicles as well. And just a really interesting one, a post-crash care link here, and a project I was involved in Africa involved training of first aid responders. And that was actually done in response to a natural climate disaster. It was a cyclone, many people seriously injured through the force of that storm. But we managed to build in there also training around first responders for road injury as well. So I thought I'd just drop that in as another kind of touch point between these agendas for us to perhaps explore. And then lastly, this concept around we need to strengthen our infrastructure to make it more resilient for extreme climate events. And I'll show you some examples around the need to build back better. But first, I'd highlight this bit of work. This was led by a colleague, Sam Johnson. And if you haven't seen this piece of work, I'd recommend it highly if you're interested in this link between sustainable transport and these broader agendas, including road safety. We looked at a whole range of different mechanisms we can actually improve livability through sustainable transport, creating livable streets, movement to public transport, and managing private vehicles. But I want to touch on just one element of this piece of work, which was the issue around providing safe speeds. And we actually did publish more than a year ago now a new guide from the World Bank on safe speeds. And in urban areas, we're certainly recommending, like other global organizations, the safe speed of 30 kilometers per hour. And this actually has a big double benefit. So firstly, from the safety perspective, the bottom graphic there is showing what those in safety perhaps have seen before. And that is above about 30 kilometers per hour, we get this effectively a tipping point. Higher speeds than 30k per hour mean that our chance of survival in a crash is reduced quite substantially. But below about 30k, we actually get reasonably good survivability. So that's where, from a safety perspective, we've been aiming for in our urban context, where there's lots of pedestrians and cyclists particularly. But the other piece of the puzzle really is the impact around emissions. And we know certainly on rural roads, we get reduced emissions with reduced speeds. And we're actually gathering emerging evidence in the city context as well, where speeds that are slow and steady at around 30k per hour actually result, we think, in reduced emissions as well. And there's also building evidence around the safer environments mean it's safer to walk and cycle when we get this interest in modal shift as well. So there's double benefits of what we're really aiming towards, linking these different agendas. But we are facing a fairly substantial challenge globally around extreme climate events. And so one of the other areas we're working around is the sort of adaptation and resilience and trying to link those topics to road safety. So there's many touch points to talk about just in terms of that graphic there. Things like increased rain events means there's less surface friction and higher crash risk. We're getting issues about flooding and washouts, damage to infrastructure, disruption to traffic management, and disruption to emergency services. So effectively, we're mapping out all these touch points between these extreme weather events and the road safety outcomes. And I guess to summarize a lot of what we're doing, we're trying to build back better when things do go wrong. So particularly when roads are destroyed through flooding, building that back better to make sure we embed the safety provision in any improved infrastructure. A couple of very quick examples to finish up. So this is the same road on different days. So to the left, tropical paradise. This is in Samoa. But to the right is after an extreme rain event. And a really sad example, unfortunately, where 2 children were killed and many others seriously injured when a bus driver just decided to drive through this flooded ford here, and the bus got swept away. So that's a really bad outcome. Obviously, it's got significant safety implications. And so as part of the response here, we're building back better effectively and building a high level bridge that would not be as impacted in a severe weather event in future. Another couple of examples. The one on the left is from India, and we get this a lot again with extreme weather events. The roads being washed away, and these are obviously costly to repair, but also immediate safety potential increases in risk. So what we're trying to do is, again, build back better, put in place the protective works to prevent these events happening in future, but also at the same time building back better. So perhaps a wider shoulder to make it safer for motorists as well. On the right, a really interesting case study. This is recent work in Vietnam. So the top right image is quite typical. There's effectively 2 informal lanes with the motorcycles riding on the rightmost edge of the roadway, and cars more towards the centre on the right-hand side, so driving on the right-hand side here. What we saw in many locations after heavy rain was flooding on these roadways, and motorcycles would swerve out into the main traffic to actually avoid that flooding. And that's actually a very unsafe situation, because the cars are going much faster, trucks are going much faster, and a lot of conflicts because of that flooding and that swerving to avoid that roadway. And so in these sorts of projects, we're trying to build in a bit more flood resilience. So the left-hand image there with flood prevention mechanisms, or down the bottom, those 2 images improving the drainage on the roadside to actually make sure that we can avoid that flooding altogether. An interesting case study on the bottom 2 slides, images there from the Pacific Islands, where initially unsafe drainage was included in the project, but the road safety audit identified that issue and it was replaced with safe transversable drainage. So again, building back better, building back safer to improve the resilience of the road, but also to improve road safety outcomes. So just to sum up, these are really important agenda items at the World Bank, large investments being made. We are working on these linkages between these agendas, and keep your eyes open for some new work probably late this year, early next year, around the linkage between road safety and sustainable transport, and another technical piece around resilience and road safety. And essentially, I think what we are trying to do is seek out the co-benefits, really understanding what these linkages are and how to maximize the benefits in all areas from our knowledge of those linkages. Speed is a great one to look out for. Joint benefits there around safety improvements, but also emissions reductions, active mobility, many other benefits besides. And then also things like building back better to make our infrastructure more resilient, but also safer. And key to all of this really is analysing this problem with all of these different objectives in mind, and using that then to help identify our priorities and funding appropriately, and capturing all of those benefits and actually valuing those benefits as well. So I'll finish there, but to say thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions that you've got. Thanks.
Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, Blair. Those examples, super interesting, but also horrifying in a sense, in terms of what can happen in terms of road safety when we do experience these adverse climate events. So oftentimes we focus on, what those climate events are actually happening on the ground, but we don't often link it to road safety outcomes. And like you said, there are so many co-benefits if we can actually link these issues together and address them concurrently. So thank you for those examples. And like you, I'm also very interested in understanding how many of the jurisdictions that we have represented in today's webinar series are actually linking these climate and sustainability issues with their road safety work. So Mark, do you mind bringing up the results of the poll question that we asked earlier? And I'll take this opportunity to also invite Frank, Prash, and Blair to come back and join me for a question and answer session. So we had the results from the poll question. So is road safety integrated into the climate and sustainability agenda in your jurisdiction? And actually, it's higher than I thought. About 43% of our participants have said yes, and just over half have said no. Actually, I was expecting it to be a lot lower. So it would be interesting if you want to actually, for those that have actually said yes, maybe if you can pop into the question and answer box how your jurisdiction is actually linking those issues together and what are some of the practical actions that you're doing. That would be really interesting for us to actually have a look at. So if you've got any questions for our speakers, please continue to feel free to put it into the chat box. And Frank, I know that you've been busy answering a lot of the questions in the Q&A box already, but there was one that I was actually very interested in. I think a participant commented on how do we make the scenery along the roadway more aesthetically appealing? And I think your answer was, in one example, you planted blossoms, on the roads to make it more beautiful, which is fantastic. What are the distraction implications from doing something like that? Is it more risky to make the roadways prettier and more aesthetically pleasing because drivers are likely to look out the window a bit more and not pay attention to the road? How is that addressed?
Yeah, I think as with many things actually, and I think it's a sort of running theme in all these also the presentation of Prasanti and of Blair. It's not a matter of either one or the other. It's sort of combining things and proper planning. And I think also that's why it is quite feasible because you do basically some better planning of things you would already do. So it's not like a huge extra exercise. So I think on this one, I think there's also other questions, how to break the monotony and the boring, the boredom factor and driving along long roads. I think it's really a matter of having open vistas and also having different types of vegetation and also irregular spacing of vegetation that really sort of creates a sort of sense of excitement and differentiation. I really like the point on bringing poetry into the road sector and in the road side planting. And with the blossom trees, there was an area where we thought, if you have at least for 2 weeks in a year, you have this fantastic area with blossoms. It will also, it was a bit of a remote area. It will add value to that area. And also for a couple of months ago, I was in Maharashtra. There was a town which was developing a sort of religious a place and wanted to project itself. So again, you can make it all more attractive. And I think in general, combining art and poetry into infrastructure is really a good thing, because I think when things are beautiful, they last longer. People take more care of them. And I think what I really liked about Prasanti's presentation, of course, this is really a very difficult situation, and luxury is not really there. But I think what she's saying that, kids that walk along, risky roads, and I mean, it's a risk to them, yeah. But I think it also changes your mindset that if all the time you're exposed to sort of unsafe and unhealthy and ugly environment. So I think sometimes bringing a bit of beauty into our work, I think is really something we should do.
Yeah, thanks for that, Frank. And Blair would know in Australia, we've got this beautiful stretch of road called the Great Ocean Road, which has beautiful scenery. But what we often find is that a lot of people are spending too much time looking at the beautiful scenery outside and not paying enough attention to what's actually happening in front of them on the road. So once again, I guess we have to be very mindful of actually integrating them very well to ensure that the climate as well as the road safety benefits are both met. So Prash, if I can move to you for a second, thank you for that wonderful presentation again. And as you can see from the chat, there's been a lot of interest in the example. And I think many are asking, is there a report available on the Malawi case study? And is that available for download?
So I've put a couple of the links. We have published now 3 of the 5 papers. 2 are still in submission. So I put 2 of the links up there. I'll try and get the other links to you, just to maybe share out with others. But hopefully you'll see all of the different parts of that. That last paper, which is currently in submission, is kind of the overarching one that brings everything together from the air pollution road safety nexus point of view. But yeah, there is no sort of one report, but there's sort of different papers that will highlight.
Yeah. So just as a follow-up to that, I'll be interested in what is Malawi doing with all that wonderful, rich information that you collected from your study? Have they implemented measures? Are they
So
utilizing?
there's, like I was saying, there's a lot of traction there now. There's a lot of kind of conversation happening around it. We are actively helping the teams there to look for funding to be able to take this on and do a bit more work on it. I think it always boils down to both a question of funding, but also capacity and sustainability. And sadly, as you would have seen from my title slide, our main collaborator there sadly passed away during the study. And that's left a huge hole for our Malawi team there. But we're working to kind of develop that. And also, I think, just develop the capacity within the country, within the policymakers and the practitioners there, to look at this nexus. Because one of the things that we did find was maybe because we were coming from a road safety sort of background, we found it much easier to identify road safety experts and policymakers within the country, within the setting. What was more difficult was to bring out that kind of air pollution expertise from within Malawi, and we had to rely on international experts a lot more to kind of help us in that sort of scenario. And so we're now working to try and identify those key people that can help us to sort of push that work further.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think you mentioned at the end of your presentation as well that you're, looking at scaling up the project and, the issues are actually shared across many different regions. And I think many of the participants here would be very interested in hearing the outcomes of that. So thanks for your great work in that area. Blair, so maybe we turn to you for a second now. I found the examples that you gave, as I mentioned earlier, both fascinating and horrifying. I think the bus that got swept away by the floodwaters, I mean, that's an extremely tragic event. So in a scenario like that, when there is an extreme weather condition or weather event, do governments often provide alternative routes for safety, for safe transportation, or do they provide any warning to the population on what to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. And yeah, this is actually quite a big issue. We do get quite a few deaths around the world with people, swept away in floodwaters. And even a seemingly safe little bit of flooding can actually be quite dangerous because it can be, deeper than you thought, and it can be quite swift. So there's a couple of issues there. One is letting people know actually how dangerous this is and giving them a warning about how deep that flooding might be. And there's certainly systems that are used around the world do that. But it's funny because, many people have this, perhaps overconfidence in their own vehicles or their driving skills, and often attempt to cross these locations. And we actually see that quite often. So I think we do have a bit of a gap there about informing the public and even decision makers, to be honest, about when to cross and when to close roads effectively to prevent these things happening. But any road closure takes a bit of time to respond to that. The other side of it, though, is if you do close a road, what happens to the traffic then? And certainly there's a chance that you can now have large numbers of vehicles traveling on very low quality roads that aren't really designed for that, and perhaps through villages and towns and the like. So we need to think a little bit more about our planning and response for those sorts of events as well. And the last point I'd make is here in Australia, there's been events where roads have been closed, and you go onto Google Maps to find the alternative, and it's such a big country with so few connections that the diversion might be literally 1,000 kilometers more than what you'd expect it to your journey to be. So we do need to build into our planning a bit more around the alternatives, and this is really part of what governments are doing, is making sure they've got provision for road closures and alternatives when that does happen, because it is happening more and more. It's quite a common issue.
I think sadly, as you mentioned, that this is becoming a more frequent occurrence with everything that's happening in terms of climate. And it's fantastic to inform people, but as we all know, under the safe system approach, people do make mistakes, and we often don't make the best decision for ourselves when faced with these issues that are quite urgent and quite frightening at the time. So as much as governments can integrate safety solutions that don't rely on people doing the right thing, that would be fantastic. And I guess the $1 million question is, how do we actually maximize the benefits of linking climate with road safety? And I think we've had some great examples from each of our 3 speakers today, and I'm sure there are many more areas and aspects that we can delve into, but unfortunately we've come to the end of our hour and we're going to have to wrap up our session. But I've certainly learned a lot from each of our speakers today, and I've questions that I may have to follow up with you separately. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank Blair, Prash, and Frank for taking the time to join us and share all that information. We really appreciate it. And we hope there'll be another opportunity to invite you back and share some further outcomes from your respective projects. So once again, thank you so much for your time, and we will catch up with you again soon. So Mark, can we please bring up the next slide then? So just before we wrap up the session, if we can bring up the very last poll question. As usual, it would be very informative for us to understand what you found most interesting and helpful from today's webinar series. So if you can fill out that very last poll question that is going to pop up on your screen very shortly, there it is, that would be very much appreciated. And a very common question around, will the materials from today, including the presentations and the recording, be made available? They will be, and you'll be able to find it on that website that is listed up on your screen now. And if we move to the next page, please, Mark. And in 2 weeks' time, we will be holding our 4th session of this webinar series, and we'll be delving into urban resilience and transportation. So covering some of the issues that we've touched on today and in a little bit more detail. I'll also like to mention that the APRSO Road Safety Conference will also be taking place on the 9th and 11th of September in Manila, and registrations are currently open. So if you jump on the APRSO website, you'll be able to register for the conference now as well if you would like to attend. So I encourage you to all join us for the very next session in 2 weeks' time. And with that, on our very final slide, just to say a big thank you once again to all our speakers, and also to all of you for joining us in today's session. I hope you have a great day or evening, and I look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Take care, everyone.